and welcome to the second episode of the Andaman Nicobar Collective. This collective is an online platform to share stories, views and debates about the past, present and future of the ecology and the indigenous communities of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. These islands are home to a unique ecosystem and six indigenous groups which are in various stages of acculturation. While these communities continue to hunt and gather, they also live under the protective welfare regime and are in intermittent contact with the outside world. The challenges faced by these communities and their struggle to cope with change are a primary subject of interest for this collective. And with some of the leading experts on the island's history and narrative as part of this collective, this platform discusses critical issues of development, ecology, and policy for a better understanding of the island's futures. In today's discussion, we will look at the contribution of some of these individuals, Samir, Acharya, Govinda Raju, Rauf Ali, and George Weber, who have helped in crafting a new narrative of the islands. And taking us through this exciting and insightful journey will be Dr. Vishwajit Pandya, Dr. Madhumita Mazumdar, Dr. Manish Chandi, and Zubair Ahmed. And thank you, Zubair, for joining in today. We've already had our round of introduction, but I would request that if you can give a quick, short round of introduction about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Zubair Ahmed. I was born in the islands in a Mopla family. And after 10th, I went to mainland for studies. I was in Kerala, Chennai, and Bangalore. Did my journalism and worked with a few media organizations for almost 7 years. My last stint was at Times of India, Bangalore. Came back to the islands in 2001, almost after 15 years. Worked as associate editor with Light of Andamans, which was started in 2005, relaunched in 2005. I worked along with Mr. Govinda Raju. And then after his demise in 2009, 2010, I launched Light of Andamans, and it was published for next 3 years. And then there was a break. Right now, I just work as a freelance journalist, and also I've started planning to start a news portal from our islands, the Sunday Islander. The website is getting ready. Uh, so that's briefly about me. Thank you all for inviting me to this discussion.
Thank you, Zubair. Madhumita, can you please introduce the session for today?
Yes, certainly. But before that, I must say that Zubair's very modest introduction of himself leaves out the fact that Zubair is one of the most respected voices in the Andaman Islands today. And he carries the legacy of the people we are going to remember, our forebears. The Andaman Nicobar Collective perhaps would not have been possible had we not drawn inspiration from the many people who actually showed the way to make a place which is so marginal to the mainland consciousness of India to acquire center stage whenever there was a crisis and a need for all-round intervention. So Zubair carries the legacy of that first generation of intrepid actors, activists, scholars, and even just people who were passionately involved with the islands for various reasons. So ideally, we would have actually, the Andaman Nicobar Collective would have wanted this to be the first episode, but for other pressing reasons, we had to shift it to the second. But there's also a context for this because we lost one of the very respected voices of the islands, Samir Acharya, Samir Da, to most of us, a couple of weeks ago. And today's episode, we begin by remembering him and the many others who gave Samir and his initiative a different kind of global audience and interest. So without much ado, I think that I will sort of pass on the conversation, or rather the initiative to start the conversation, to Zubair about his memories of Samir and Govinda Raju, as we will sort of move on and give us a sense of the times in which people like Shomita or Govinda Raju were inspired to make Andamans a much more sort of a place which sort of in a way or tried to make Andamans acquire a voice. I think that is the more important thing. And it is from that that we can begin our, remembrance of all those who joined them. So Zubair?
Thank you, Madhumita. My memory about Samirda goes back to 2001 when I came back, and in 2001 I once met him in his office, and soon after that Supreme Court order, I again went to meet him, and it was not a very pleasant meeting for me because I was one of critic of Samirda and the Supreme Court judgment at that time. And then he gave me a very passionate hearing, and started explaining me about what was happening in the islands, because I was cut off from the islands for almost a decade, and I was very young and I didn't know much what was happening with the environment or the tribes there. Whatever I knew was through the newspaper articles which I read while I was in the mainland. So when I met him, he explained me everything, why this case was filed and all. And gradually, I also started to realize why his voice was important and why he did it. Because there was a lot of criticism on the ground at that time. So I initially, though I was a critic, then I started convincing people around me, those I met, I started telling them they should go through the judgment and all. And why Samirda was very important for the islands, because at the time to take that such kind of a stance is very difficult politically as well as socially. The population in the islands is not aware about their own environment. They are totally cut off, and I would say that though they think themselves to be islanders, they are mostly mainlanders, and they have no connect with the land or the surroundings. They just live on the islands. That still continues. So that disconnect is always there. So it was not forest for them, it was all timber for them. The beaches were all sand for them. So still people criticize people who actually talk about all this. So at that time, that too 20 years back, it was very difficult for to take such a stance and go to court and get that judgment. So I think whatever Savirda has done till now, I salute him for that particular step at that time, that too 20 years back. That was incredible, and nothing can erase that from the discourse about the islands. Uh, Mr. Raju's association, I think we can talk later also after Dr. Pandya gives us his memories about Sajirda and all, because my association was mostly to just understand about the islands. It was not an academic interest, and my role was more on the ground, meeting people, talking to them, and getting their views, and again communicating with people who were like Manish is there, Pankaj was there, and Pandyaji, of course, he was there. And on the ground, it was always Sabir, who was always there. Whenever I go and meet him, he used to give me some, always tell some anecdotes. Okay, the last meeting, I still remember, it was in September, last month, on the beginning of the first week of September, and he wanted to raise a lot of issues with the central government regarding the water crisis in the islands, the power crisis in the islands, and the the governance, about the governance also. And he had found some channels through which we could communicate with the center, and let them know about the condition of the island. So he was till the last minute. He was very active, and then we also prepared 2 letters. Okay, that was all during this lockdown. So I feel after that, his health started. Uh, he means he, his health deteriorated, and then is unable to meet anybody. And I went and met him once, but could talk, or because the uh, he was put on oxygen and all. So till the last minute he was so active, and he still had so many issues to raise. And though he was not very social, he had no many friends outside, but he would make a call, and you would go and meet him, and then he would discuss a lot about the islands and all. And the last year, when there was this movement on inner line permit, I had a long chat with him. So he gave me a lot of perspective on how to raise this issue. And then he also uh, gave me some material about it. And with, obviously there was so much content with him, and then he was unable to talk, but still he continuously talked for I think 2 3 hours, and I have a recording of it with me, which I think I need to uh, make it public also sometime, because there are a lot of issues which he talks so passionately about conservation, uh, and the kind of apathy that the island still face.
Uh, in the first time when I landed up in Port Blair, that was in 1982. And after landing there and finishing my work in Little Andaman, I asked around in Port Blair if there were any shops, bookshops, which sold books, perhaps locally about Andaman or general books of interest. And I was told to go to Samir Das shop, which of course displayed this. It used to sell scientific instruments and chemicals and things like that, and there were huge cans of gases and things like that in the parking lot of the shop. I thought this can't be a bookstore. So anyway, I went inside, and there was Samita and his trusted colleagues who were there. And I was welcomed, and Samita asked me, "So what are you looking for?" I said, "I was looking for some books, particularly on the island." And I was told that you have the collection of it. So he says, "Yes, you have come to the right place." And he uh, extinguished his cigarette and went to the almirah and opened a couple of books he took out, and he showed it to me. So I said, "Okay, I'll buy all of those, and tell me how much do I owe you." And he said, "नहीं आप क्यों आए हैं यहाँ पे?" So I said, I have come here on research, and I just spent about a year in Little Andaman, and now I'm going back." And I told him my plan. So he said, "No need to give money to me. You're a student, and that's fine." And that set up my relationship with Samirza. I never saw him as a businessman, which he was. In fact, he used to think that. And I think some of his family members also felt that he was more of a tea consumer and cigarette smoker in the shop than and doing networking. But see, that was one of his tremendous things. That his shop was like a adda. In Bengali, there's a reference to people sitting around and gossiping. It's either called rock baji or it is called adda. And Samit's shop was a adda. So Pankaj, I, then even Manish, whenever we reached the island, we used to always at least go and show our face to him. And he always would inquire what's going on and what's not going on. But I think his entrepreneurial skills of not only running a shop, diversifying what is sold in the shop, was also evident in way in which he put people into connection. I think one of the landmarks in history of Andaman probably, and all the people who have been involved in different ways, those who are dead, or those who are remembering today, we are remembering, and those who have continued to live, including Zubair Bhai, Manish. These are people who were connected or brought a gelled in because of Sumirda, particularly from the year of 2000 I think particularly from the year 2000, because that's when the Jarvas came out on the road, and the things changed considerably. After that, there was a court case, PLI was there, and the whole issue of Jarva was taken up to the court cases. Prior to that, there was Little Andaman timber exploitation thing, which Pankaj and Samita were directly involved in. Not Pankaj, but I would say Kalpavix, the organization he was working with. So he became a fulcrum around which all of these people used to get together. We used to come to know what others are involved in and what other people are interested in. And he would match up. He was a kind of what they call in Bangla a ghotok. He was a matchmaker. So when tsunami happened, he got me connected with the intact people in Delhi because I wanted to go to Little Andaman. And he said, yes, you should go and you should meet up the Ungis and find out what the hell is going on. How did they survive the tsunami? And he made immediately in Ahmedabad, where I was living in then. And he said, "Ki aapko jana hai, aap jaiye, ticket ka." But fortunately, I didn't need it because some other arrangement to Little Andaman, which I did go. But Samir was always very keen to help and to suggest how to make things happen. I will never forget that fact that there was some kind of misunderstanding, in the whole group, so to say, of people interested in different aspects of Andaman, and particularly the welfare of the tribes. Uh, and Samita said that, look, you should not quit your relationship with the administration. You should tactfully be involved with them because that makes a difference in the way academic can contribute to the policies, rather than just saying that everything is wrong. Which I thought was a very remarkable, a very astute way for him to look at the politics of the administration. He never was part of the administration. He was always against a lot of things and was always forthcoming to give concrete advice and help the administration. And I sort of followed that, and I sort of took up that it's a good stand. You can make some constructive difference by being part of the establishment, I'm not part of the establishment, but at least I have a finger in it, and I try to irritate it when required, and I try to encourage things when it can be guided into a right direction. And that has been a very constructive relationship with the islands, which is much more inspired by the kind of personal politics and ideology Samita imbibed, or as I understood he imbibed. Um, well, I can never forget him because through him, I got connection into Cary. I got to know a lot of people in the engineering department of the PWD. Through him, I came to know some of the babus working in different offices, and that was a good way. Otherwise, my limitation was that I was only concerned with our tribes. I was not really exposed to the community of the islanders, which he made possible for me to access. And he organized talks whereby I could talk to people or community at large, such as near the bus stop, there was a electricity department hall. And he insisted that I should talk about this idea that the Andaman Islanders don't have agriculture. Why don't they have agriculture? So he was very interested in trying to reach people, to connect people. And that, I think, was a wonderful spirit. And we have lost it. We now don't have that kind of thing, and it should be kindled. One of the purpose of this collective, which was organized, was to reach out to people and bring people into this connection, and so that there's a better awareness of the environment and the heritage which we have in that island, which he very much was concerned with. That's why he started SANE, and intact was his another connection to that whole connection. I think I'll stop there and let it go further.
All right, yeah. So, like Dr. Pandya said, yes, I also met Samirda as and when I used to go to there. Actually, when I first went there, actually, began with there from then. And I wasn't a visitor. I went and stayed. So I was there for like continuous periods of a couple of years as stretches, coming back for holidays once in 2 years, or once in a year, or once in 3 years or 4 years also, as opportunity kind of presented itself. But with Samir, I was always there in his shop to kind of, first of all, because I didn't have my superiors or my bosses or my seniors in ANET to kind of consult at some point of time. I always go and kind of have a chat with him. And he was always, can you hear me, guys? Hello?
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
So he was always ready with a cup of chai, or even he would invite me to for a glass of or some beer at Champagne. So we go to the back alley behind Champagne, go into the little bar, and he would sit over a beer and of course roll up his cigarettes, and we'd have a nice long chat about this and that and whatever else. And what actually struck me and what I keep in my memory of him is a couple of things. One in particular is the fact that he was not. I mean, he didn't pretend and didn't. He never was a pretender. He was always a very original person, very like Vishwajit said, very astute, very clear in what he thought of at least when he spoke of things, and a man beyond his times actually. For the Andamans, all of us have known it from various times and years. There was only one voice speaking on behalf of the environment, only one voice speaking on behalf of the indigenous community, the tribals. That used to be Samir. In fact, when I first went to the Andaman in '95, I was given a kind of a brief by my colleagues and bosses and superiors, Rom Whitaker, Guy Whitaker, Harry Andrews, Romain, and they all mentioned if you need, there's somebody else there called Samir Acharya, and he's a person you can go and meet. He runs another sister organization called Sane. We also deal with the environment and so on. And in fact, Rom and Zai had come to the Andamans in 1976 first, and they had met Samir and kind of pushed him on and saw his kind of interest in so many matters. And he already kind of was considering setting up an organization called Sane, and Intact came into being, and so on and so forth. But Samir was the voice of the islands for a very, very long time. And he inspired a lot of us to actually take up cudgels with the government, and very rightly, like how Vishwajit pointed out, not to be necessarily always against the government, but also work in tandem with them, show them a potential positive or a possible alternative, rather than just saying, no, what you're doing is wrong, or what you're doing doesn't make sense. There are other ways to make sense of these issues. So yes, I would meet him very, very often. In fact, in the monsoon, many monsoons actually, when I would ride into Port Blair for some work or the other on my motorbike with the raincoat, etc. When I wanted to not just time to kill, but also time to spend properly, I would go to Samir's office, and that madam would be there. I forget her name, that auntie, and she would tell me, "Ha, Samir da matlab aa jayega abhi. Thodi der baitho." Matlab take out my raincoat. Sure enough, hot cup of chai would come, and in a couple of minutes or wherever he was, he would come and we'd have a nice long chat about this, that, and whatever else. So I was doing a water harvesting project in Vandu. He helped me out with intellectually a lot of issues and ideas. So despite, and what also amazed me was this thing, what I'm going to tell you right now. I was a man on the move. Like I would go traveling everywhere on my motorcycle. I would walk, I would trek, I would go on lungi from this corner to that corner and so on. So Samir Da was stationed in his office at Tarang Place. But despite being there, sitting on his chair, smoking a cigarette and having a cup of chai or whatever, sitting on that chair, he would know what is happening in Diglipur or also one corner of Campbell Bay. And for me, I had to travel everywhere to kind of find out. He would sit in that chair and find out. He would know things. That was a really fascinating thing about him. Right? Like Vishnu said, the connections and the interconnections that he had, the way he kind of was able to kind of garner and put to use information that he garnered for the benefit of the islanders and for benefit of not just the indigenous people, but the islanders as a whole. His concern was very much like all of us. I mean, we all have a common concern of saying, yes, there is this beautiful place called the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the two separate group of islands, and they're very special to all of us in various ways. I think one of the pioneers of finding this kind of special place was Samir Dai, and he was a person who actually kind of saw that the beauty in it and the reason and the rationale as to why one should fight or one should can try and help kind of prevent anything in a poor way of saying it bad happen to the islands. Anyway, so I mean, I don't remember exactly when the last time when I met him. I used to keep going, bumping into him in his office or going over there and meeting him and stopping over on my bike on my way back to Vandu. So, let's go and meet Sangeeta and say bye. So on my way back, I'll go and stop over and say bye. But the last couple of years, it was much, very, very infrequent, my meetings with Samir. Only on the phone sometimes, or would even call up sometimes, chat on the phone. And his connections with a lot of other people within the government itself. He would was able to kind of push his influence into various other spaces from the, like which we just pointed out, the PWD. Who would think of, I mean, if only in a person with the right mind would think of saying, yes, a PWD is an organization who should be influenced in terms of environment or ecology. Not just the tribal welfare department. There are so many other offices or not just the forest department, for instance. So he was somebody who would kind of had a finger in various pies, so to speak. Being a government an order supplier, supplying goods, articles or whatever for the government. In fact, a lot of local boys, I remember when I used to go and meet him at that point, kya kar raha hai? He's a government order supplier, फिर भी government गाली देता है. They used to say things like that. But without realizing that he used to play this dual role of, one was his business, which he was kind of like, which is rightly pointed out, he wasn't really kind of pushing his business forward. But more importantly, he was so closely associated with kind of preserving, his concern for the islands was very genuine and very deep, in fact. So yeah, we've lost a very important person from the islands, and there are this new bunch of people like Zubair and Dennis and other people who are also there. Dev Kumar Badra, I know, a lot of people who are from the islands who are now taking over those roles that Samir used to play, and that's very nice to know also. And so, all good wishes to all of you as well. Thank you.
Okay, just one. I think I'll just conclude this, round of remembering Samita with my own couple of kind of thoughts that I had about him. I met Samita kind of, I think, in 2005. And of course, it was the same experience at Tarang Traders, warm, affable, very welcoming. I enjoyed every minute of the conversations I had with him subsequently. But the more important thing is that Samir may not have been a trained historian. He was full of anecdotes, but if you could sort of in a way string together those anecdotes, there would be a very insightful sort of in a way understanding of the islands, which I discovered much later, because I was at that time interested not in the indigenous communities of the islands, but on the Bengali settlers. And we both concurred that while the history of partition and the refugee resettlement had been worked to a great extent on the subcontinent, the story of the refugee rehabilitation had not been told enough and very well. And that sort of inspired me to pursue that. Of course, I had an interest already, but the kind of insight Samita gave me helped me take that project to a much larger level. And I will never forget the kind of help that he extended to me every time I went up to him with a question. Of course, he had a sort of an encyclopedic kind of, knowledge of not only the history of the islands, but the history of the subcontinent as well. And the early history of the islands, particularly on the refugee rehabilitation, he had these stories of the first rehabilitation commissioner, Shadhan Raha, a Bengali gentleman who had a very, very important role to play in settling the refugees first in South Andaman and then up to Middle Andaman, Rangbat and so on. And of course, subsequently, there were concerns about the developmental plans and so on. And I still remember his recalling of the acceleration of developmental policies, particularly tourism-led development policies during the period of late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. And he also sort of, had an encounter with him. But the point is, Samita had always something for everyone. I came from the discipline of history. I found him to be an extraordinary historian in his own way. And Vishwajit, of course, knew him in different ways. So did Zubair and Manish. And yes, the next time I step into Port Blair and I pass Tarang Traders, it will be with a great amount of sadness. Port Blair will not be the same without Samita. And I think that's all I can say. As we move on to discussing another intrepid journalist and almost a voice of the islands, Mr. Govinda Raju, and who I also regard, even if I didn't know him, I knew him through his writings. I used to read The Light of Andamans with great care when Professor Pandya used to subscribe to it, and it used to arrive in mail in Ahmedabad, and we would be looking forward to every edition of it. So I think Zubair would like to tell us a bit about Govinda Raju and the way he sort of brought the many compelling problems of the islands to a broader public.
Govinda Raju was my mentor, and he introduced the islands to me. When I came back from mainland in 2002, my first meeting was very accidental. I used to read came across a column named "Na Kahu Se Dosti" in the Daily Telegram, uh, published by the Andaman Nicobar administration, and this column was written by one Mr. Raj Andamani, and I love the pieces because it touched our emotions and strike a chord with my feelings and attachment towards the islands and the people there, the past, and my childhood also. So the writings were so touching. I thought of writing a letter to the editor, and I appreciated that column and sent it, but it was never published. So, but I wanted to convey it to the person who wrote it. So I tried to find his phone number. I got his landline number, and then one day I gave him a call, gave Raz Andamani a call, and I told him that I liked your column, and I told him that I want to read the letter to you. And I just read it to him. So he started laughing and in a coarse voice with a very authoritative voice. He was very excited and then curious about me, and he said that, "No, we need to meet." And then he just asked my address and came to my office. Okay. That was the beginning of a long journey, a decade-long journey. We used to meet every day in the evening for 2 hours, sit and discuss a lot of issues. And I'm very fortunate that the very productive last 10 years of Mr. Raju, I was very closely associated with him. And then just before the tsunami, we are just discussing about bringing out a news magazine from the islands. And then a group of people came together, and when uh, they decided to take over Light of Andaman, one of the oldest newspaper magazines from the islands, and we relaunched it. Okay, but there was a cutoff period, like 1 year we were totally cut off because tsunami happened. But during that period, I came to know that he was a great Urdu poet also. And Govind Raju to be a Urdu poet, it was very difficult for people from many parts of the country as well as from the islands to realize. But he was the only person in the islands when the census was done. He would say that his mother tongue is Urdu. Okay, and he will ask them to forcefully mention it in that form. So I was also excited about it, and then I started reading his Urdu poems and all. It was like very he stood apart from the usual Urdu poets in the islands, and he published an anthology also. And after tsunami, we again met, and then in 2005, December, we started the Light of Andaman. That was a big journey. The format was very new to the islands, and the idea makes I was also associated with newspapers earlier, so I brought that journalism part of it. He was the writer basically. He was not a trained journalist, but he was a good writer, and so anything he would write, it will become a journalistic piece. And there's no issues which is untouched. From 2005 to 2008-9, we have covered entire islands, history, governance, the idea of the island society, the environment, tribes, everything. And one thing which I always appreciated was Govind Raju was never critical about the islanders, because he always felt that they never had a space to speak about themselves. So he basically provided them that space through Light of Fundaments. And especially to those marginalized communities like Ranchis and all. He was one person who spoke for them, wrote for them. He became their voice. And even other people, another major thing, because it totally changed the discourse on the islands. That's what I feel. Because if you wanted to know about the island, it was mostly writers from outside the islands, okay, the academics who wrote. He brought the people, the communities in the islands into that discourse. He gave them a voice and they became part of the narrative. That's what I felt if you look at the writings that he has done. And he was about the tribe, again for the tribes. When he spoke for the tribes, he never spoke against the settlers. He always wanted to create a bridge between them. And but he had a very strong opinion for the tribes, and he forcefully kept it. And he always kept warning the administration also that the policy or whatever decisions they were taking on behalf of the tribes were not sufficient. And I think Light of Andaman did become a major tool in changing various policies in the islands, because it brought islands also into the attention of the nation, Delhi also. And while formulating policies, especially said that the ground realities in decision making and all, it's all always worked for the commercial benefits of people from outside or the migrants, and they had hardly any say. They were here for a short period and lacked the seriousness to tackle the problems and all. So he always kept saying that the people of the islands also needs to be taken into account while making such kind of decisions and all. So he basically become a bridge between the settlers, the tribes, and even the environment also. And what I felt, because he was not, I also become a bridge between Mr. Raju and other academicians, and I was always in touch with Manish or Pandyaji and even Pankaj and all. So I think I was the person who used to communicate with others and all, and used to tell him everything about what's happening and then bring to his notice. And then but he knew what was happening around him, and he wrote very strongly about it. And I learned everything, because today if uh, I love this islands, it's because of Mr. Raju and his writings. And I basically all the work that we do nowadays, I think the foundation was laid by Mr. Raju. That's what I feel. And with this demise, the islands really lost a voice. Otherwise, like Madhumita said, the settlers' history was never written from their perspective. It was always from an outsider perspective which was written. And Light of Andaman gave that space for those settlers to to bring their voice out. And see, people always felt, people always felt that no, he never took a very strong stand about where he stood. But if you read his writings, like there's one piece which he wrote on Tirur, the last post of South Andaman. Okay, that it's a very interesting piece in which he says that some settlers came and started complaining that the Jarvas come here as kings and they take away everything from us. Okay, they come like kings and collect whatever they like, banana, coconut, jackfruit, and anything else. And he just heard them, and then when we came back, he wrote it in a very interesting way. He wrote that they were the kings. All the islands in Andaman archipelago was their fiefdom. All its resources were at their disposal. We encroached upon their land. We stole their food. and we push them back to the brink of extinction. They should be complaining, not we. We are the usurpers. They are the inheritors. They did not deserve the plight they find themselves in. But unfortunately, the settlers never realized that. But he just listened to them so patiently, and he always got their voice, but still he wrote what he felt was very important, and he was in the public domain. That's most important. Unlike if we compare these two personalities, both are co-brothers. Okay, they both are co-brothers. Uh, Samirta and Raju, they are co-brothers. They both are very important for the islands. I think if we uh, give the credit for environmental protection and all to Samirta, the history part of it belongs to Raju. That's what I feel. He brought the history of the islands to the fore, so that today people read or people write. Nobody can ignore what Raju wrote about the past history of the islands. And if we look at history also, there's a very important part he played, because whenever the history of the islands were written, it was always about cellular jail. It's always started with cellular jail and the revolutionaries. It was Raju who actually brought into focus the untold past from 1857 to the construction of cellular jail. And he always focused on that. And then that he made everyone realize that it's not cellular jail that's the center of Andaman Nicobar Islands past or the history. It's 1858 from where it started. So this is again a major contribution of Mr. Raju, which I felt uh, later on almost all who wrote about the island, they started following it. But there were books written before that about that and all. But what I think, the freedom struggle part of it, and the role of the convicts who were actually transported to the islands, and their history, and normally means usually people always felt that they were ashamed of their past and all. He made them proud of their grandparents and all who were transported here, because you cannot change your past. That's what he used to tell them. You cannot change your past, but you don't feel pity for them or don't feel ashamed of it, because and the new generation which is there in the islands, okay, we all call it mini India and all. This is all, this has come up after that only, from that convicts only. So he brought he made people feel proud about their past as well as about their present, and then they made them realize that history is very important to be preserved as well as told and retold again and again. I see my association with Rajesh never ended, because every day I do read something what he has written, or I go through it, and whenever I want to write something, I'll refer to him. Today also I do that. Thank you very much.